Let's take a look at the First Step Back. You're probably all familiar with it, at least at a high level. So the First Step Back was signed into law in towards the end of 2018. A couple of the kind of primary things that is in the bill and in the law is reduction of mandatory minimum sentences for many felonies and a number of programs that create opportunities for prisoners to earn early release for participating in different forms of rehabilitation programs. So, so what I thought I would do is I'm going to play a couple 10-minute or so clips from the floor debate on the First Step Back before it was sent over to the White House for signature. So I'm going to start with, and basically I'm going to try to do what I did with the other C-SPAN clip from the policing policy lectures, give you both kind of a Democrat video bite as well as a Republican segment. So so we're going to start with Senator Durbin and Booker discussing the bill as well, and then Senator Cornyn on the Republican side. Listen to him for a few minutes discuss the bill. So let's go over to here, and I got this queued up. Yep. So play this for about 10 minutes, and then I'll pause, and then I'll move ahead a little bit, and we'll listen to 5 or 10 minutes or so of Senator Corbett. So here we go.
Full of crime victims. And I hope my colleagues will join me in opposing the Cotton amendments.
Would the senator yield for a question?
Happy to yield.
So first of all, I just want to express my gratitude on the floor. I've been here in the Senate for almost exactly 5 years, and Senator Durbin, Senator Grassley have been nothing short of heroic in my eyes in consistently working the entire 5 years to get us to this point where we are, to use a football metaphor, on the 1-yard line in getting this over. Obviously, Senator Mike Lee, Senator Whitehouse have been also in that category. You did an incredibly good job of laying out that we have amendments that go counter to the groups, the victims groups, to their interest and to their well-being, their often emotional well-being of being re-traumatized, forced to be back out there. But I want to ask you a question about that last amendment that Cotton is making, about that so-called exclusion list, people that won't be eligible for particular programs before they're released. And in other words, there's these programs that they could enroll in while they're in prison that would ultimately shave a little bit of time off their sentences. These programs, though, I'd like for you maybe to go into them, because they are programs that actually are evidence-based programs that actually lower recidivism rates. They save taxpayer money. And the idea behind this, maybe if you could explain it, is the idea behind this is to make sure that when people released, that they don't come back. In other words, if they don't get these programs, it's more likely that those very people that he's trying to exclude from them might come back. Can you explain why these programs are important, why it makes sense?
Yesterday, thank you, our colleague Senator Cornyn, Republican of Texas, came forward and said his state of Texas and other states are showing that they can reduce recidivism, in other words, committing another crime after you're released, by treating the prisoners differently in their state prisons. And as he said on the floor, you may be shocked to think that Texas would be a leader in this, but they have been. And what they've seen is a reduction in the incidence of crime and a reduction in the incidence of incarceration, things which we'd like to see happen. Reduce the cost of taxpayers for prisons, but reduce crime on the street too. Make sure you do both. He believes they've achieved it. And what they did was to look at programs that work. And so what we did was the same thing. Senator Grassley and I, as well as you mentioned, Senator Cornyn, Senator Whitehouse, we looked at these prison reform programs in the states and said, what can we learn from them? And what we did was to establish the obligation of the Attorney General. This is not the obligation of social workers, but the obligation of the Attorney General of the United States to take a hard look at the programs that work for prisoners. What can we do to make sure they don't commit another crime, create another victim, come back to prison? And we spell out here exactly what we're looking for: the most effective and efficient evidence-based recidivism reduction programs. Long title, but what it basically means, we don't want to waste any more time here. We want to focus our tax dollars on programs that have proven results. And we offer these to prisoners unless you committed one of the crimes that makes you ineligible. We offer these to prisoners, and they can, by participating in them, reduce the time they serve or be released to a halfway house or something similar to that. So that's what this is all about, start to finish. And we believe that this will work. Now, what if they mess up in the course of being enrolled in a program? Well, we've got a provision in here that says, you're done. You're either going to do this in good faith, positively, without any violations of your responsibilities as a federal prisoner. We'll give you your chance for less time, but no nonsense. Good program, good participation, we hope good results. And we're going to measure it. We're going to come back, the General Accounting Office is going to give us a report on our success. Those that were released, how many turned around and committed another crime? So we're going to take a hard look at this, an honest look at it, I might say. And I believe that this is the best way to do it. Make sure it's evidence-based, make sure it's fair, an opportunity for those who want to participate and turn their lives around to do just that.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Okay, so I'm going to pause there and check the timestamp here on the 1:36. So I have to do this while recording, but I'll try to be quick about it. Oops, 1:36. All right.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I'd ask unanimous consent that the
Without objection, so ordered.
quorum call be dispensed with. Thank you, Mr. President. The Senate has before it a bill called the First Step Act. The name is significant because it shows that this is not a comprehensive fix to the problems of our criminal justice system, but rather a first critical step in the right direction. A study by the United States Sentencing Commission found that nearly half of the people released from federal prison in 2005 were arrested again in the next 8 years. Half of the people released from federal prison since 2005 were rearrested within 8 years. Considering that 95% of state and federal prisoners at some point will be released, those odds are pretty bleak. But here's the reality. Almost everybody in prison will serve their time and get out of prison. The question for us is, will they be better prepared to live life on the outside in a productive way, or will they simply re-engage in a turnstile, or as one gentleman referred to himself in Houston, Texas a few years ago when we were talking about this issue, he called himself a frequent flyer in the criminal justice system. Unfortunately, we see that in the federal system, according to the United States Sentencing Commission, half of the people repeat their mistakes within 8 years. This is bleak but not hopeless, because we know there are reforms that will work that help improve the chances that more people will be able to live a lawful life productively outside a prison system and who will not reoffend. We've seen these changes implemented across the country at the state level, including my hometown, my home state of Texas, which have yielded incredible results. So this might cause some people a little bit of a shock, because Texas, of course, has a reputation for being tough on crime. People don't run for public office saying, I'm going to be soft on crime in Texas and get elected. But what we have seen is that people said, I think we can be smarter on crime and produce better results at a lower cost. And those have been, that message and those things that have followed have been enormously successful. So let me talk about that a little bit. In Texas, the initial interest in criminal justice reform was first cost-driven. In other words, people were wondering, how are we going to continue to pay for 17,000 more prison beds that we think we're going to need because of our growing population? The growing prison population was simply outpacing the corrections budget, so state legislators were forced with a very difficult financial choice. But as it turns out, the reforms that we adopted did a lot more than alleviate the budget strain on the criminal justice system. Using recidivism reduction programs, including job training and vocational education, we reduced our incarceration rate and our crime rate by double digits at the same time. So using the sorts of recidivism reduction programs that are included in the First Step Act at the state level, we were able to reduce our incarceration rate and our crime rate by double digits at the same time. I remember a few years ago when former Attorney General Michael Mukasey testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He said the single most important measurement of whether the sentencing practices are working is the crime rate. The crime rate. This is at a time when people were talking about, well, we put too many people in prison, so we have to let some out. But they weren't paying attention to how that impacted the crime rate. And that stuck with me over these many years, because I think he's exactly right. If these programs do not protect the public safety, then we shouldn't be doing them. If they don't lower the crime rate, they're not worth the effort. But our experience in Texas and in Georgia, North Carolina, Rhode Island, places that have implemented these programs, they've seen their incarceration rate and their crime rate drop at the same time. So we're trying to replicate those successes at the federal level through the First Step Act. In so doing, we hope to allow people to transform their lives as we allow low-risk offenders to lead productive lives in their communities once they leave prison, and assuming they comply with all the rules and regulations. And I believe this legislation will lead the way for additional steps that we will take afterwards, but this is an important first step. This bill will provide funding for the Federal Bureau of Prisons to develop risk assessment tools to pair individuals with programs proven to reduce the risk of recidivism. Now, this isn't just social engineering or some hope that we have. This is based on proven examples of programs that will help people, for example, deal with their drug or their alcohol addiction. Senator Cassidy from Louisiana has put in this bill some very important provisions relating to the diagnosis and treatment of people with dyslexia. I'm convinced that there are people in prison who were told as they were growing up, you're too stupid to go to school, because they couldn't read and they simply dropped out, and their dyslexia, which was holding them back, was not diagnosed and properly treated. So I'm grateful to Senator Cassidy for some of the provisions in the bill relating to the identification of people with dyslexia and providing them access to programs that will help them learn and succeed and improve their lives, and at the same time reduce the likelihood they will end up back in prison after having been arrested again. By spending time in prison completing evidence-based programming like I've mentioned, education, job training, drug treatment, life skills, faith-based programs, we can give people an opportunity to prepare themselves for their transition to life after prison. This is because the incentives in this program are really important. I think we as human beings all operate based on incentives. And the incentive for prisoners is to go through the program, gain the earned credit so that they can be released not to shorten their sentence, but in lesser confining conditions, for example, a halfway house. I want to remind our colleagues that not all offenders, of course, are eligible for these credits. The bill specifically lists 48 offenses that disqualify offenders from earning time credits, including crimes like murder, assault, carjacking that results in injury and death, and the unlawful possession or use of a firearm by violent criminals and drug traffickers. In other words, by focusing our efforts on low-risk offenders and by giving them the opportunity to access these programs, these education programs, these addiction treatment programs, we can focus our attention and our money on the truly violent and high-risk offenders, which I think is also an important feature of this legislation. But it's important to remember that just because a specific crime is not included in the exclusion list of 48 offenses, it doesn't mean that the offender is automatically entitled to the earned time credit. The person must first be determined to be low risk. In other words, that's the fail-safe. That notwithstanding whether the offense is listed or not, if you're not a low-risk offender and determined by the testing that's done by the Bureau of Prisons, you won't be eligible for this less confining conditions. This isn't a determination made by Washington bureaucrats or even politicians. It's left to experienced law enforcement officers and wardens who work with these individuals on a daily basis. We want to give the opportunity to those who will take advantage of it to turn their own lives around. But we will not do so at the cost of public safety. That's exactly what these risk assessment tools are designed to do, to tell us who is at highest risk of reoffending. I believe this legislation is an investment with the potential for astronomical returns. We're not just talking about money, we're talking about human potential. We're investing in the men and women who want to turn their lives around once they're released from prisons. And we're investing in so doing in stronger and more viable communities, and we're investing tax dollars into a system that helps produce stronger citizens. When it comes to positive results, you don't have to take my word for it. There's plenty of research that shows just how valuable these programs can be. For example, in 2013, a study by Rand Corporation found that prisoners who participated in education programs were 43% less likely to return to prison than those that did not. Employment after release was 13% higher among prisoners who participated in these programs, and those who participated in vocational training were 28% more likely to be employed after they were released. Our prisoners should be more than just a warehouse for human beings. They should also serve as places where rehabilitation takes place. And hopefully people can take advantage of the opportunity once they've made a mistake and served their time to transform their own lives into productive citizens. That's what this legislation tries to do, and that's why it's gained such broad support on both sides of the aisle. By investing in these education and training programs, these recidivism reduction programs, we can ensure that people who get out of prison, more of them will actually stay out of prison. This bill is our opportunity to make meaningful changes in our criminal justice system, our opportunity to begin fixing a problem that plagues our country, and our opportunity to take a model that's been working in the states for more than a decade and use it to benefit all Americans. The odds of these individuals leaving prison and becoming more productive members of society should be higher than the odds of a coin flip. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this legislation, and I look forward to voting yes when it comes up for a vote later today or tomorrow. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Okay, so I'll leave it to you to decide to what extent you hear bipartisanship, a truly thoughtful discussion across both parties about the First Step Act, and but that at least gives you an opportunity to hear from some of our policymakers who voted for this bill directly.